Have you ever stopped to wonder how many of your beliefs, opinions, and responsibilities are truly your own? We like to think we're independent thinkers, but we're constantly being shaped by social expectations, political tribes, religious traditions, advertising, and algorithms, all that quietly tell us what to value and how to live. Real freedom isn't just escaping someone else's control. It's learning to recognize when you're no longer thinking for yourself. I'm Brandon Jubar, and this is Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore autonomy as the practice of self-authorship, rejecting coercive power, mastering our own impulses, and intentionally choosing the commitments that give our lives meaning. In this episode, we're asking an honest question. What beliefs do you defend, or what burdens do you carry simply because someone else expects you to? Because freedom isn't measured by how loudly we claim our independence. It's measured by whether our lives are actually guided by our own carefully chosen values. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. So our first reading is from Zechariah. It's chapter 9, verses 9 through 10. Our second reading is from the letter to the Romans. It's chapter 8, verses 9 and 11 through 13. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. It's chapter 11, verses 25 through 30. Now we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages and the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from Zechariah. Thus says the Lord, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will take away the chariots from Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be broken. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, you are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. And if the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies, because of his Spirit who lives in you. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have an obligation. But it is not to the flesh to live according to it. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you will live. And our gospel reading is from Matthew. At that time Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for this is what you were pleased to do. All things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. All right, so let's go back and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from Zechariah, and this reading paints a striking picture of a leader arriving on a donkey instead of on a war horse. Whether or not the image reflects history, its symbolism is still very powerful. What it's doing is showing the contrast between leadership that's built on coercion and leadership that's built on service. We tend to think that freedom comes from having more power over other people. Ha ha ha, I've got the power. But history suggests the opposite. The more a society relies on fear, violence, or forced conformity, the less freedom everyone has, even those who hold the reins of power. Autonomy begins by refusing to play that game. Instead of controlling others, we learn to govern ourselves. Instead of demanding obedience, we earn trust. Lasting freedom grows through humility, not through intimidation. Real freedom rejects domination and chooses humility over force. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that we must choose humility over control. Personal freedom, it's not measured by how much power we can accumulate over others. It's measured by our willingness to reject coercion and lead our lives according to our values. We must choose humility over control. Our second reading was from Paul's letter to the Romans. And this passage contrasts two different ways of living. It's presented in the language of flesh versus spirit, but when we strip it of all its theological language, it asks a pretty timeless question. What is really in charge of your life? Your impulses or your values? Right? Your impulses, the flesh, or your values, the spirit. Real autonomy doesn't mean doing whatever feels good in the moment. If we're controlled by anger, fear, ego, addiction, or the need for approval, then we're not truly free. We're simply reacting to whatever pulls us the hardest at the moment. Personal freedom grows when we pause, reflect, and choose our response instead of letting instinct or social pressure choose for us. That's how we become the authors of our own lives rather than just being products of our circumstances. In this reading, Paul is saying that freedom begins with learning to govern ourselves. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that we must master ourselves before the moment. The greatest threats to our freedom, they're not always outside of us. Many of them live within us. The more we learn to act from our deepest values instead of our strongest impulses, the more genuinely free we become. We have to learn to overcome the impulses of the moment. We must master ourselves before the moment. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Matthew. And this reading invites people to exchange a heavy yoke for one that fits. Whether or not we accept the religious claims behind the story, the image points to an important truth. Not every burden is the same. Some burdens are imposed upon us. Others are ones that we freely choose. Too many people spend years carrying expectations they never really thought through and agreed to. trying to satisfy family pressures or social norms or just someone else's definition of success. Those burdens become exhausting because they're not really ours. We didn't choose them. Autonomy means deciding which responsibilities deserve our time and our energy. When our commitments reflect our deepest values, they stop feeling like chains and they start becoming meaningful expressions of who we are. It may be a bit counterintuitive, but the responsibilities we choose can become the source of our freedom. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we must choose the burdens that matter. Freedom. It's not the absence of responsibility. It's the freedom to decide which responsibilities are worthy of your life. When we choose our commitments intentionally, they stop weighing us down. They help us become the people we want to be. We must choose the burdens that matter. All right, let's review the lessons we talked about so far. In our first reading from Zechariah, the main lesson I came away with was we must choose humility over control. In our second reading from Romans, the main lesson I got was we must master ourselves before the moment. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we must choose the burdens that matter. Freedom is about so much more than being left alone. It begins when we refuse to let power or fear dictate our lives. Freedom grows as we learn to govern our own thoughts and actions instead of just reacting to the world around us. And freedom reaches its fullest expression when we intentionally choose the responsibilities that reflect our deepest values. Real autonomy is not selfish independence or doing whatever we want. Real autonomy is the ongoing practice of becoming the author of our own lives while using that freedom to build a healthier, more compassionate community around us. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall, see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care because our freedom is being shaped more than we realize. Social media algorithms, partisan media, online echo chambers, these things constantly nudge us toward what to believe or what to buy, what to fear, even who to dislike. If we never pause to question those influences, we're not exercising autonomy. We're simply following a script that's written for us by someone else. Real freedom begins when we learn to think before we react. Now, these lessons are important because freedom can't be forced. Throughout history, religious and political movements have tried to use the power of the state to make people conform. But genuine belief, meaningful values, and lasting peace can't be created through coercion. Whether the pressure comes from a government, a church, or a social movement, autonomy requires the freedom to choose rather than the obligation to comply. We should care about these messages because many of us are carrying burdens we never chose. We live in a culture that glorifies constant productivity, endless consumption, and saying yes to every demand. The result is burnout, not fulfillment. Protecting our autonomy means deciding which responsibilities truly deserve our time and energy, and then having the courage to let go of the rest. Choosing our own values-driven commitments is one of the healthiest acts of freedom that we could possibly take. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Well, it's important to understand that autonomy isn't just about resisting outside control. It also means taking an honest look at the beliefs that we defend and the responsibilities we carry. Sometimes we can discover we've been living someone else's script without even realizing it. So with that in mind, here's your question for the week. What is one belief you loudly defend, or one obligation that you carry that belongs more to the expectations of the crowd than to your own true values? Right, this question invites us to separate what we've consciously chosen from what we've simply inherited or absorbed. Letting go of a borrowed belief or an unnecessary obligation, it doesn't make us selfish. What it does is free us to invest our time, energy, and attention in the things that genuinely matter to us. So I'll give you 2 quick examples from my own life. When I became the Director of IT Acquisitions at the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, I realized I was constantly exhausted. At first, I blamed the workload. But after some honest reflection, I discovered the real problem wasn't just the job. It was the story I'd been telling myself. I believed that my worth depended on my productivity. If I wasn't constantly doing more, achieving more, or checking one more thing off the list, I felt like I was falling behind. That wasn't one of my values. It was an expectation that I had just quietly accepted from the culture around me. And once I recognized it, I started making choices that aligned with the work I actually valued instead of the pressure to just always be busy. I had a similar realization about the same time with politics. I noticed I was spending just far too much time on Facebook, reposting political memes and defending positions because that was simply what my social circle sort of expected from me. The more I stepped back and started reading, researching, and trying to think for myself, the less interested I became in all the online outrage. I didn't stop having opinions. I just started making sure that they were actually my opinions. And I found that I had much more confidence discussing issues because my beliefs were grounded in understanding instead of being sort of grounded in belonging. Now, both of those experiences taught me basically the same lesson. Autonomy isn't just freedom from other people's rules. It's the courage to question the stories you've been living and deciding whether they're really yours. The more our public words match our private convictions, the more confidence, integrity, and peace we're going to experience. And when people stop pretending to agree just to fit in, our relationships become more honest. Our communities become healthier. And our freedom becomes something we actually live instead of something we just talk about. So spend some time with our question for the week. What is one belief you loudly defend or one obligation you carry that belongs more to the expectations of the crowd than to your own true values? Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "When you are content to be simply yourself and don't compare or compete, everybody will respect you." Whether or not every person ends up respecting us isn't really the point. The deeper insight is that we stop giving the crowd the power to define who we are. Now, another translation of this same passage says, "If you look to others for fulfillment, you will never truly be fulfilled." That's a timeless reminder that freedom begins on the inside. So as you reflect on this week's question, ask yourself whether the beliefs you defend and the obligations you carry, ask whether or not they genuinely reflect your own values, or whether they exist because you've been chasing someone else's approval. The more your life is guided by your own thoughtful convictions instead of the expectations of the crowd, the more authentic, peaceful, and genuinely free you can become. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. But in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to the important lessons you come across wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 14th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that real autonomy is the ongoing practice of becoming the author of our own lives while using that freedom to build a healthier, more compassionate community. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV. Copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, 2011 by Biblica Inc. Used by permission, all rights reserved worldwide. Thank you again for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find the podcast at thecodaproject.com or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Pocket Casts. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.